June 25th, 2009. A Los Angeles hospital room was filled with an unnatural silence. Machines beeped softly. Doctors stood still. Nurses avoided eye contact. The king of pop, the most famous entertainer in the world, lay motionless on the hospital bed. Michael Jackson was gone. As doctors followed protocol and prepared the body, one physician noticed something unusual. Resting directly on Michael's chest, partially hidden beneath the hospital sheet, was a folded piece of paper. At first, it seemed insignificant, just a letter, just paper. But when the doctor gently picked it up and unfolded it, everything changed. The words written on that page were not random. They were not medical. They were not meant for the public. They were deeply personal, emotional, and devastating. The doctor froze. Another nurse began to cry. And within minutes, everyone in that room understood something terrifying and heartbreaking. Michael Jackson had left a message. Who wrote the letter? And when? Why was it placed on his body? And why would its contents haunt the people who read it forever? Stay with us, because this is a story of the letter found on Michael Jackson's body, and the truth it revealed about his final thoughts, his deepest fears, and the people he loved most. June 25th, 2009, UCLA Medical Center, Los Angeles. The emergency room did not feel like a place of urgency anymore. The chaos had passed. The frantic movements, the shouted instructions, the desperate attempts to revive a body that refused to respond, all of that had dissolved into a heavy, unbearable stillness. Michael Jackson lay on the hospital bed, motionless. Moments earlier, doctors had fought against time itself. Chest compressions, oxygen, medications administered with hope that bordered on denial. For over an hour, the room had been a battlefield between science and inevitability. But now the machine spoke a quieter language, a flat, unchanging rhythm, a sound that meant there was nothing more to be done. At 2:26 p.m., Michael Jackson was pronounced dead. The words felt unreal even as they were spoken aloud. Nurses stood frozen, some staring at the floor, others at the man whose music had shaped their entire lives. One doctor removed his gloves slowly, as if delaying reality would somehow undo it. Another wiped his eyes and turned away. Michael Jackson was not just a patient. He was history. He was memory. He was a part of the world. And now he was gone. Hospital protocol took over. The room shifted from emergency response to post-mortem procedure. Medical staff moved with quiet respect. Voices were lowered. Every action felt ceremonial, almost sacred, as if the space itself understood who had just passed within its walls. A senior physician, calm, experienced, and visibly shaken, stepped closer to the bed to begin the standard examination. He had done this countless times before, yet never like this. Never with someone whose face had once been plastered on bedroom walls, album covers, billboards, and television screens across the planet. As the doctor adjusted the sheet that covered Michael's body, something unusual caught his eye. Resting on Michael's chest was a folded piece of paper. It was not a hospital form. It was not medical documentation. It was not something that belonged there. At first glance, it looked simple. Plain white paper, carefully folded once, then again. It hadn't fallen there accidentally. It was positioned deliberately, centered over Michael's heart. The doctor paused. "Did anyone place that there?" he asked quietly. No one answered. A nurse stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with confusion. "I didn't," she said softly. "I thought it was hospital paperwork." Another nurse shook her head. "No, that wasn't there earlier, was it?" Silence. The paper seemed heavier than it should have been, as if it carried a weight far beyond its physical form. The doctor hesitated. There was something unsettling about touching it, a feeling that this was not just an object, but a message waiting to be uncovered. Carefully, with gloved hands, he lifted the paper from Michael's chest. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He unfolded it slowly. What he saw made his breath catch. The handwriting was unmistakable, delicate, looping, deeply familiar to anyone who had ever seen Michael Jackson's notes, lyrics, or letters. The ink was slightly smudged in places, as if the paper had been handled with trembling hands. This was not typed. This was not rushed. This was personal. The doctor read the first line, and then he stopped. His face changed instantly, from professional detachment to raw, human shock. His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. One of the nurses noticed. "Doctor?" she whispered. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself before reading further. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. This isn't medical," he said. "This is the letter." "A letter?" Another nurse repeated, stepping closer. The doctor nodded slowly. "And it was meant to be found." A hush fell over the room. Michael Jackson lay peacefully on the bed, his face calm, almost serene, as if the torment that had followed him for decades had finally loosened its grip. And yet, the letter suggested something else entirely. This was not the act of someone who left nothing behind. This was the act of someone who had something to say. The doctor continued reading silently, his eyes moving carefully across each line. With every sentence, his expression grew more emotional. One nurse covered her mouth, sensing that whatever was written there was not meant to be overheard, yet impossible to ignore. Finally, the doctor lowered the paper. "This changes things," he said quietly. "What does it say?" someone asked. He hesitated. Hospital protocol was clear. Personal belongings and documents were to be secured and handed over to authorities or family. But this didn't feel like a belonging. It felt like a confession, a goodbye, a truth too important to be buried in paperwork. "It explains why he was so tired," the doctor said slowly, "why he was carrying so much pain." He looked back at Michael. "For the first time," he added, "I think we're seeing the real man behind the legend." The letter was carefully placed into a protective folder, but its presence lingered in the room long after it was removed. The staff moved on with their duties, yet no one spoke above a whisper. Everyone knew they had witnessed something profound, something that would never be erased from their memory. Outside the hospital, news helicopters circled. Fans gathered. The world was about to learn that Michael Jackson had died. But inside that room, among a handful of stunned medical professionals, another truth had already emerged. Michael Jackson did not leave in silence. He left words behind, and those words would soon force the world to confront a side of him few had ever truly understood. The letter was not supposed to be read in that room. At least, that's what the senior physician kept telling himself as he stood near the window of a quiet administrative office, the folded paper resting on the desk between him and the hospital's legal coordinator. Outside, the city of Los Angeles moved as if nothing had changed. Traffic flowed. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sun shone relentlessly. Inside, time felt broken. Michael Jackson's body had already been transferred, covered respectfully, escorted by security through a private corridor. The world would soon know he was gone. But before the headlines, before the crowds, before the chaos, there was this letter, silent, fragile, and heavy with meaning. Hospital protocol demanded restraint. Personal documents were not to be read unless necessary. They were to be cataloged, secured, and passed to proper authorities or next of kin. And yet, the moment the doctor had seen the handwriting, the moment he had recognized the unmistakable loops and curves, something inside him had shifted. This was not just paper. This was a voice. "I only read the first paragraph," the doctor said quietly, his voice still unsteady, just enough to understand what it was. The legal coordinator, a woman with years of experience handling sensitive cases, nodded slowly. "And what was it?" He hesitated, then answered honestly, "A goodbye, but not in the way people expect." The letter was placed inside a clear evidence sleeve, sealed carefully, as if it were something sacred. The handwriting was neat but emotional, controlled yet trembling, the handwriting of someone who had thought deeply about every word, someone who knew they might not get another chance. The doctor closed his eyes briefly, remembering the opening lines. They were not dramatic. They were not grand. They were painfully human. "If this is found, please know I didn't leave because I wanted to disappear. I left because I was tired of hurting." That single sentence had undone him. "I've seen suicide notes," the doctor continued softly. This wasn't one. There was no blame, no anger, just exhaustion and love. The legal coordinator exhaled slowly. Love for who? For his children. The doctor said without hesitation. For his mother, for the version of himself he never got to be. The room fell silent. Outside the door, staff members moved quietly, aware that something extraordinary was unfolding behind closed walls. Whispers traveled through the hospital, not as gossip, but as disbelief. Michael Jackson was dead. The words felt unreal, even hours later. But the letter made it real in a way nothing else could. Later that afternoon, a small group convened, hospital administration, legal counsel, and a representative from the coroner's office. The letter sat at the center of the table like an uninvited guest, commanding attention without saying a word. The coroner's representative cleared his throat. Legally, this document must be preserved. It could be relevant to the investigation. Investigation, the doctor repeated quietly. Yes, but it's also personal. No one disagreed. The letter was not addressed to the public. It wasn't meant for fans, critics, journalists, or even history. It was written to people Michael loved, and perhaps to himself. One passage, which the doctor could not stop thinking about, spoke of childhood. I learned early how to perform, but I never learned how to rest. Applause became my oxygen, but silence became my fear. When the lights went off, I didn't know who I was anymore. Another line followed, quieter but devastating. I tried to be everything for everyone so no one would leave, but in doing that, I left myself behind. The legal coordinator wiped at her eyes discreetly. She had spent her career around documents, contracts, affidavits, cold legal language. This was different. This was raw. Does the family know? She asked. Not yet, the doctor replied. And when they do, it needs to be done carefully. Because this letter was not just an explanation. It was a confession of pain that had been hidden behind sequins, choreography, and impossible perfection. As evening approached, news alerts exploded across phones and televisions around the world. Michael Jackson dead at 50. Fans screamed outside the hospital gates. Some collapsed in grief. Others sang his songs through tears, clinging to music as if it could bring him back. Inside, the letter waited. One hospital staff member, a young nurse who had grown up listening to Michael's music, stood quietly near the doorway. She had not read the letter, but she had seen the doctor's face when he first unfolded it. What was he like at the end? She asked softly. The doctor thought carefully before answering. Gentle, he said, even in pain. There was no anger in that room. Just someone who had been fighting for too long. That night, the letter was secured in a locked file, its contents known only to a few. But its impact had already begun to ripple outward, changing how those who glimpsed it would remember Michael Jackson forever. Not as a myth, not as a headline, not as a controversy, but as a man who carried too much for too long. And the most haunting truth of all lingered unspoken in the room. The letter was never meant to shock the world. It was meant to finally tell the truth. The Jackson family did not learn about the letter from the news. They learned about it in a quiet control room, far from cameras, crowds, and screaming headlines. A room where grief had already settled so deeply it felt permanent. It was late afternoon when Katherine Jackson arrived at the hospital, escorted through a private entrance. She had barely slept. Her eyes were swollen, her posture fragile but dignified, the way it had always been when she carried unbearable pain without complaint. With her were Michael's children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket. Prince tried to be strong. At 12 years old, he felt it was his responsibility to stand tall, to protect his siblings the way his father always had. But his hands trembled, betraying him. Paris held tightly onto Blanket's hand. Blanket, still so young, didn't fully understand what had happened, only that his father wasn't coming back, and that the world felt suddenly unsafe. They were led into a private conference room. The door closed softly behind them. A hospital representative spoke first, choosing every word with care. Mrs. Jackson, there's something important we need to share with you. Something that was found with Michael. Katherine stiffened slightly. Found? The doctor who had discovered the letter stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable, not because of procedure, but because of emotion. There was a letter, he said gently. It was placed on Michael's body. Folded. Personal. The room went completely silent. Paris looked up sharply. A letter from who? The doctor hesitated. From Michael? Prince's breath caught in his throat. My dad wrote it? Yes. Catherine closed her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. What did it say? The doctor swallowed. It wasn't addressed to the public or to the media. It was a reflection about pain, about love, about exhaustion. Paris felt something twist violently inside her chest. Did he say goodbye? The doctor shook his head slowly, not in the way people usually do. There was no finality, no anger, just honesty. Catherine pressed her hand to her heart. I need to see it, she said. There were legal steps, of course, protocol, documentation. But no one in that room had the heart to deny her. The letter was placed carefully on the table in front of Catherine. It looked small, ordinary, and yet it carried the weight of a life lived in extremes. Catherine unfolded it with shaking hands. Prince leaned closer. Paris held her breath. Blanket watched silently, sensing the gravity even if he couldn't understand the words. Catherine began to read. At first, her lips moved silently. Then her shoulders began to tremble. Tears fell onto the paper. One passage stopped her completely. Mother, I hope you always knew I tried. I wanted to be strong like you, quiet in my pain, faithful even when I was breaking. Catherine let out a sound that was half sob, half prayer. Oh, my baby, she whispered. Prince felt his composure crack. He blinked rapidly, refusing to cry, but when Catherine read the next line aloud, he couldn't hold it anymore. To my children, you saved me more times than you will ever know. Paris collapsed into tears instantly. That's true, she cried. That's so true. The letter spoke of guilt, not the kind the world accused Michael of, but a deeper guilt, the guilt of not feeling good enough, of feeling like he was always failing, no matter how hard he tried. I gave the world everything I had, but sometimes I worry there was nothing left for myself. Please don't think that means I didn't love you. Loving you was the only thing that ever felt real. Prince clenched his fists. He loved us, he said firmly through tears. He loved us more than anything. Blanket finally spoke, his small voice cutting through the room. Is Daddy mad? Everyone turned to him. No, Catherine said immediately, pulling him into her arms. Your daddy was never mad at you. Never. The doctor watched quietly as the family absorbed the truth. Not the truth of scandal or fame, but the truth of a man who'd been quietly drowning while smiling for the world. Another line shattered what little composure Catherine had left. If rest finally comes, please don't remember me as broken. Remember me as someone who loved deeply, even when he was tired. Paris buried her face into Prince's shoulder. Prince wrapped his arm around her, suddenly feeling older than his years. This letter, the legal representative said carefully, will remain private unless the family decides otherwise. Catherine nodded. It stays with us. There was no hesitation. Later, as the family prepared to leave, the doctor approached Prince. Your father spoke of you often, he said softly, even when he was struggling. Prince nodded, wiping his eyes. He was trying, even at the end. Yes, the doctor replied. He was. As they walked down the hallway, surrounded by grief and silence, one thing became painfully clear. The world would argue forever about Michael Jackson, but the people who mattered most now knew the truth. He didn't leave a scandal. He left a letter full of love, pain, and humanity, and nothing would ever sound the same again. The first whisper about the letter did not come from the media. It came from inside the system. 2 days after Michael Jackson's death, while the world was still drowning in shock, grief, and nonstop news coverage, a quiet tension began to grow behind hospital doors, legal offices, and private phone calls. Someone knew. Someone had talked. And once that happened, the letter was no longer just a family secret. It was a ticking bomb. The call came late at night. Catherine Jackson was sitting alone in her bedroom, the house silent except for the faint hum of the television downstairs, which she had forgotten to turn off. Every channel still showed Michael's face. Old performances. Headlines. Speculation. The phone rang. She knew. before answering that nothing good ever came from calls at that hour. "This is Catherine." "Mrs. Jackson," the voice said carefully, professionally. "This is your family attorney. I need to speak with you immediately." Her heart tightened. "What's happened?" There was a pause. A long one. "There's information circulating," he said, "about a personal item found with Michael at the hospital." Catherine closed her eyes. "The letter," she whispered. "Yes." Her grip tightened around the phone. "Who knows? We don't know how many people yet. But at least one hospital employee mentioned it to someone outside. From there it spread. To the press?" Catherine asked sharply. "Not yet," the attorney replied. "But reporters are asking very specific questions." Too specific. Catherine felt a familiar weight of fear, the kind she had lived with for decades. The fear that the world would once again take something private, something sacred, and tear it apart. "They cannot see that letter," she said firmly. "They cannot." "I agree," the attorney said. "But we need to decide quickly how to protect it." The next morning, the family gathered again, this time not in grief alone, but in urgency. Prince sat at the table, his jaw tight. Paris stared at her hands. Blanket leaned against Catherine's side, clinging to her sleeve. "What happens if it leaks?" Paris asked quietly. No one answered right away. Finally, the attorney spoke. "If the letter becomes public, it will be interpreted, analyzed, twisted. Headlines will remove context. People will claim it was a suicide note or a confession or something darker." Prince shook his head. "That's not what it was." "I know," the attorney said, "but the public won't read it the way you did." Catherine felt anger rise in her chest. "They've already taken enough from him," she said. "They will not take his last words." "But what if we release it ourselves?" Paris asked suddenly. Everyone turned to her. "What do you mean?" Prince asked. Paris's eyes were red but steady. "What if we share on our terms, so they can't lie about it?" The room went silent. Catherine considered it carefully. She understood the instinct, the desire to control the narrative, to protect Michael by telling the truth first. But she also knew the world. "No," she said gently. "They won't listen the way we listened." Prince nodded slowly. "They'll read it like a headline, not like a heart." The attorney leaned forward. "Then our priority is containment. The letter must be secured, legally sealed. No copies, no photographs." "Do it," Catherine said without hesitation. Meanwhile, outside the family's control, pressure was building. A major media outlet had heard enough to begin digging. A reporter called the hospital directly, asking about a personal note discovered at the time of death. The hospital denied everything, but denial only fueled curiosity. Within hours, rumors appeared online. Sources claim a mysterious letter was found on Michael Jackson's body. Unreleased final message? What did Michael Jackson leave behind? Paris saw the headlines on her phone and burst into tears. "They're already doing it," she cried. "They're already turning it into something ugly." Prince slammed his hand on the table. "They don't get this. They don't get him." Blanket looked up, confused. "Why are people talking about Daddy?" Catherine pulled him close. "Because they don't know how to stop," she said softly. That night, Catherine made a decision. She took the letter out of its protective folder and held it one more time. Alone. No lawyers. No cameras. No noise. She read it again, not as a mother preparing for battle, but as a mother listening to her son. She realized something then. Michael hadn't written the letter for the world. He hadn't written it for history. He hadn't written it to explain himself. He had written it because he was tired. And protecting it meant honoring that exhaustion. The next morning, the attorney filed an emergency legal motion sealing all personal effects found at the hospital under strict confidentiality. Anyone who violated it would face serious consequences. The hospital cooperated immediately. The leak stopped. The headlines faded. The world moved on to speculation, conspiracy, and noise. But the letter remained untouched. Safe. Weeks later, Prince asked a question no one expected. "Grandma, what happens to the letter someday?" Catherine looked at him. "What do you think should happen?" Prince thought carefully. Maybe one day, when people stop trying to tear him apart, they can read it. Not now. Not when everything is loud. Paris nodded. When they're ready to see him as a human. Catherine smiled sadly. Then that day will come. But not yet. She placed the letter back into its box. And for the first time since Michael's death, she felt something close to peace. Because in a world that never stopped taking from him, there was still one thing they had saved, his final truth. The letter was supposed to remain sealed. That had been the agreement. Weeks had passed since Michael Jackson's funeral, and the world had moved into a strange new phase. Not grief anymore, but obsession. Books were being announced. Insiders were selling stories. Everyone claimed to know the truth about Michael's final days. But no one knew about this. The letter stayed locked away in a fireproof safe inside Catherine Jackson's bedroom closet. Only she had the key. Only she knew where it was. Until one quiet afternoon changed everything. It was raining softly in Los Angeles, the kind of rain that barely made noise but soaked everything slowly. Prince, Paris, and Blanket were home from school, sitting in the living room. The house felt heavy, the way it often did now. Too big, too quiet, filled with memories that echoed when no one spoke. Catherine was upstairs resting. Paris stood up suddenly. "I want to see it again." Prince looked at her. "The letter?" She nodded. "I can't stop thinking about it." Blanket hugged his knees on the couch. "Daddy's paper?" Prince hesitated. He knew they weren't supposed to. But he also knew this wasn't curiosity. It was longing. "He wrote it for us," Paris said softly. "Not for lawyers. Not for the world." After a long pause, Prince sighed. "Okay, but we don't touch anything else." They climbed the stairs quietly, like children sneaking past bedtime rules. Except this wasn't mischief. It was grief. Catherine's room was empty. The safe was still hidden behind coats and folded blankets. Prince knew where the key was. He'd seen Catherine open it once. He retrieved it carefully, his hand shaking. The safe clicked open. Inside, wrapped in protective sleeves, lay the letter. Paris held her breath. Prince lifted it out gently, as if it might fall apart in his hands. They sat on the bed together, the three of them pressed close, like they used to sit beside Michael during movie nights. Prince read it out loud again. Every word, every line. Michael's voice filled the room, gentle, apologetic, loving, painfully aware. By the time Prince reached the end, Paris was crying openly. Blanket wiped his eyes with his sleeve. But then Paris noticed something. "Wait," she whispered. "There's more." Prince frowned. "No, that's the end." She reached out carefully. "Turn it over." Prince hesitated. "Grandma didn't say." "Just look," Paris said. He turned the page and froze. Written faintly, almost as if added later, was a single sentence. Short, uneven. The handwriting wasn't as steady as the rest. Blanket leaned forward. "What does it say?" Prince's throat tightened. I can't." Paris took the letter and read it silently. Her face changed. Not shock, not confusion. Something deeper. Something that hurt. The sentence read, "If you ever wonder whether I stay because of pain or love, know that it was always love." Paris covered her mouth. Blanket didn't understand fully, but he felt the weight of it. Daddy stayed. Prince sat back slowly, his heart racing. Michael had stayed, through exhaustion, through fear, through loneliness, through the unbearable pressure of being Michael Jackson. Not because he had to, because of them. He didn't write this for the world, Paris whispered. He wrote this for when we were older, when we started asking why. Prince nodded. He knew we would. Blanket's voice was small. Did Daddy know he was going to die? No one answered right away. Prince finally said, "I think he knew he was tired, and he wanted us to know it wasn't our fault." Paris hugged Blanket tightly. "He stayed for us," she said. "That's what matters." Footsteps sounded in the hallway. The children froze. Catherine stood in the doorway. She saw the open safe, the letter in Paris's hands, the tears. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Catherine sighed, not in anger, but in surrender. "You saw it," she said softly. Paris stood up. Grandma, there was something on the back. Catherine's eyes closed. Yes, she said. I know. You knew? Prince asked. I found it the night I brought the letter home, Catherine replied. That sentence, it broke me. Why didn't you tell us? Paris asked, her voice trembling. Because, Catherine said gently, sitting beside them, some words are too heavy to give children, even brave ones. Blanket crawled into her lap. Daddy loved us? Catherine stroked his hair. More than anything. Prince swallowed hard. He stayed because of us. Yes, Catherine said. And he wanted you to know that when the world tried to tell you otherwise. They sat together in silence. Then Prince asked a question that had been growing in his chest. Grandma, what do we do with that sentence? Catherine thought for a long moment. Nothing, she said finally. You carry it. Quietly. Privately. The way he carried his love for you. Paris nodded. The world doesn't deserve it. No, Catherine agreed. But you do. She carefully placed the letter back into its sleeve, back into the safe. This time, she let Paris turn the key. That night, Paris wrote the sentence down in her journal. Prince memorized it. Blanket whispered it before falling asleep, even though he didn't fully understand the words yet. And somewhere, in the silence that followed, Michael Jackson's final truth settled where it belonged. Not in headlines, not in history books, but in the hearts of the three people he stayed alive for as long as he could. Years passed, not quietly. Nothing about being Michael Jackson's child was ever quiet, but deliberately, carefully, Prince went to college. Paris grew into herself under the brutal spotlight of public curiosity. Blanket, now BG, learned how to exist without hiding, but also without exposing his soul. And the letter never left them. It lived in memory, not paper, especially the sentence. If you ever wonder whether I stay because of pain or love, know that it was always love. Each of them carried it differently. For Prince, it became responsibility. For BG, protection. For Paris, it became fire. Paris stood backstage at a charity gala in New York, years after her father's death. The room beyond the curtain was filled with powerful people. Musicians, activists, journalists, all there to honor Michael Jackson's humanitarian legacy. She had agreed to speak. Just 5 minutes. A short reflection on legacy, compassion, healing. But as she waited, microphone in hand, her heart raced for a different reason. She hadn't planned this, but the sentence was burning in her chest. Her speech was written. Polite, safe, but she knew the truth. Every interview she had ever given ended the same way. What was he really like? Did he know how much people loved him? Was he happy at the end? And she always smiled, always deflected. Tonight, she felt something shift. Maybe they deserved to know. A voice inside her whispered. Maybe the world should hear his last truth. She glanced at her phone. A message from Prince, sent earlier that evening. Say only what feels right. Dad trusted you. Another from BG. Remember, some things are just ours. Paris closed her eyes. The lights dimmed. Her name was announced. She walked onto the stage. Applause rose, warm and respectful. She stood at the podium, breathing slowly, grounding herself the way she had learned in therapy. My father, she began, was many things to many people. The room quieted. He was an artist, a performer, a humanitarian, a mystery. She paused. But to me, he was simply my dad. A soft murmur moved through the audience. Paris continued, steady but emotional. People ask me all the time how he endured so much, how he kept going when the pressure, the pain, the loneliness became overwhelming. Her fingers tightened around the podium. This world likes simple answers, she said. But the truth is never simple. She hesitated. This was the moment. She could say it. She could quote the sentence. She could give the world what it had chased for decades. Her throat tightened. She saw her father's face in her mind. Tired eyes, gentle smile, hands clasped as if apologizing for existing too loudly. And suddenly she knew. Paris stepped back from the edge. Instead of quoting the letter, she said something else. My father once taught me that love doesn't need an audience to be real, she said, and that the most important truths are often the ones you don't explain. You live them. She looked directly into the crowd. He stayed. He loved. He gave. And that is enough. Applause erupted, long sustained, emotional, but no one knew how close they had come. Backstage, Paris collapsed into a chair, shaking. Her phone buzzed. Prince, you didn't say it. She typed back. I couldn't. 3 dots appeared. Then BG. Thank you. Paris smiled through tears. Later that night, the 3 of them sat together in a hotel room, eating takeout on the floor like they used to at Neverland. You almost said it, didn't you? Prince asked gently. Paris nodded. I felt like it was screaming to be heard. And BG asked, and then I realized Dad didn't write that sentence to be famous, she said. He wrote it so we wouldn't blame ourselves, so we wouldn't wonder. Prince leaned back. The world doesn't need every piece of him. No, Paris said. We do. Years later, a journalist would write, Michael Jackson's children remain remarkably private about his final thoughts. They would call it mystery. But it wasn't. It was respect. On the anniversary of his death, the 3 of them returned to the house. The safe was open one last time. Catherine watched quietly as Prince removed the letter. Paris didn't read it this time. Neither did BG. They already knew every word. Prince folded the paper carefully and placed it back. He trusted us, Prince said, and we kept our promise, Paris replied. BG nodded. He stayed because of love. They locked the safe, not to hide the truth, but to honor it. Some legacies are built in music, others in fame. But Michael Jackson's most powerful legacy was never meant for the world at all. It lived in 3 hearts, steady, protected, unspoken, and it always would.